Welcome. This is Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute. And in today's edition, we're going to focus on the situation here in Israel, throughout the region, as well as beyond that, with chief focus this time on the Lebanese File, where there's plenty of track 2 diplomacy underway with all the known actors involved, including the United States, France, Israel, even the Islamic Republic of Iran, but also the Lebanese state itself. The Iranian File. Its nuclear ambitions, where with that, do they still intend to attack Israel, and to what degree are they progressing towards nuclear proliferation into the realm of nuclear weapon capabilities? But before all of that, let's now turn to our panelists, all the way from the United States, is no other than Mr. Ezra Cohen, an adjunct fellow at Hudson Institute, formerly an acting Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. It's great to see you, Ezra. Also here in Israel, joining us from elsewhere here in the city is Brigadier General in Reserve Yossi Kuperwasser, formerly the Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Strategic Affairs, as well as the head of the Research and Assessment Division at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's great to see you, General. And with me here in the studio is no other than Dr. Mike Duran, formerly Senior Director of the National Security Council for the Middle East and North Africa, currently the Director of the Center for Peace and Security in the Middle East, as well as the Senior Fellow within that context, which both work. But it's great to have you here, Mike. I'd like to start with the Lebanese File. Where are we, and where are we expected to head from here with all of that track 2 diplomacy currently behind the scenes?
Well, thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me. There's a lot of signs that suggest that a deal might be in the offing. The New York Times is reporting today that Khamenei, the supreme leader in Iran, has sent a message to the negotiators that he wants to see a deal. There are reports that Amos Hochstein, President Biden's envoy, is on his way to the region now. And we were told before that he wouldn't be coming back unless he heard from the Lebanese that a deal was in the offing. I think there are a lot of elements in Israel that would like to see the war come to an end. The IDF can point to lots of successes in Lebanon. It can also point to the fact that Israel has successfully detached the Lebanese theater from the Gaza theater, in terms of the Iranians are no longer the Iranians and their allies are no longer insisting that there has to be a ceasefire in Gaza for there to be a ceasefire in Lebanon. All of that is true. On the other hand, as you mentioned, the residents in the north of Israel need to return to their homes in safety and with a sense of security. A lot of their representatives are saying they don't have that because the rocket fire continues unimpeded, or relatively unimpeded, from Lebanon. And we see in Israeli politics that the opposition to Netanyahu, mainly from Benny Gantz, is actually outflanking him to the right and saying that the conditions are not actually ripe for an end to the war. The big unknown in all of this is what signals is the Israeli government receiving from the incoming Trump administration, and we just don't know that. So I can argue this square or round. If I had to guess, I would guess that we probably will not see a ceasefire until Trump comes in, but I wouldn't say that it's that's 80-20. I'd put it more like 55-45.
Interesting. Well, you mentioned the former defense minister and IDF chief of staff, Benny Gantz, of course, a member of the opposition, a leader of the largest bloc in the opposition at that. Nevertheless, when we look at what he said today in his statement, he said, in southern Lebanon, we should act like in Area A, namely in Judea and Samaria, where the Palestinian Authority maintains both security and administrative responsibility. Nevertheless, if the Lebanese government does not act similar to Judea and Samaria, the IDF will act with force against terror pockets. And therefore, I'd like to ask General Kuperwasser, is this a realistic solution for the Lebanese theater, since we do hear Najim Kati, the caretaker prime minister of Lebanon, coming out and saying, we didn't hear anything about this from our American counterparts, and we don't expect to accept any type of compromise that goes beyond the scope of a UN Security Council Resolution 1701, knowing full well that here in Israel and around the world, seeing how it turned out, it wasn't very successful, to say the least.
Is it realistic? It is realistic because this is the deal that everybody discusses. That deal is talking about Israeli ability to operate in southern Lebanon if there is a reason for Israel to suspect that its security is being threatened by activities of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. That is what we are going to see if this deal moves forward. To expect the Lebanese government to accept it or Hezbollah to accept it openly is a little bit too far away, but too far-fetched. But they understand that this is going to be a part of some side agreement between Israel and the United States, that if Israel is able to prove that there is a threat to its security emanating from southern Lebanon, it would have the ability to operate. And that's something that is reasonable. And without it, of course, Israel is not going to accept anything. What we are seeing on the ground is that Israel is putting much pressure in order to make it more realistic. To the extent that it is realistic right now, Israel wants to make sure that it is more realistic. That's why Israel is widening its operation in southern Lebanon. Not only the first line of villages, but also the second line of villages are now being treated by the Israeli army. More intensive attacks on Hezbollah military capabilities in Beirut, in the Dahia of Beirut, and in other places. And clearly, there's also the threat of Israel that if you don't accept it, and if after all these efforts and after everything that happened to Hezbollah, they are still going to refuse to accept it, then we can move farther than what we did so far and take care of infrastructure that is being used by Hezbollah in order to keep fighting, that until now we haven't touched. And I think everybody in Lebanon realizes that this might be the next step, and so does the United States and also France. I think everybody's worried that we might go in this direction. We don't want to go there. We don't want to harm Lebanon as such. But since the Lebanese infrastructure is being used by Hezbollah, we might eventually go there once we finish all the other targets we are attacking right now.
Indeed. Well, Mr. Cohen, when we're talking about the current push by the Biden administration, obviously it doesn't have very much time left in order to reach a significant foreign policy achievement. And therefore, I do ask myself time and again whether or not trying to accelerate a process without clear achievements in which the sway of Iran, and by utilizing, of course, its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, will remain after this bloody war comes to an end. Is there not a reason for the Biden administration to really establish a new calculus for Lebanon in which it would be free from the tyranny of the Ayatollah regime in Tehran?
Well, I mean, look, first, a few things are going on here. First, the Biden administration is trying to lock in a positive legacy, but basically they have no credibility to do that. Trump will be assuming office on January 20th. Any promises that the Biden administration makes basically are worth zero, because we know that President Trump is going to go in a different direction. I mean, he's already announced that he's going to release all weapons shipments to Israel. So that changes the Israelis' calculus. Remember, the American administration, up until this point, has been restricting Israeli military operations and also policy with these controls on munitions and other forms of weapons and materiel. That's all going to go away. So I believe that the U.S. ability to kind of control and shape the situation, at least on the Israeli side, is diminished. At the same time, all of this back and forth diplomacy of Blinken and Amos Hochstein, it's all empty promises at this point. Now, in terms of Iran, President Trump has already given a very, very strong signal on Iran. He said that they are going to potentially put sanctions back on. They're going to increase counter-Iranian operations. So again, if I'm Israel, and Mike Duran said this perfectly. It's like, why rush to a ceasefire now if the board is going to change significantly in Israel's advantage over the next month and a half?
Well, I do have a couple of reasons popping in my mind. One is hoping that the Biden administration would not consider pushing through another UN Security Council Resolution 2334-like resolution that quite effectively ended the so-called disputed territories in Judea and Samaria and turned them into occupied territories by the Obama administration's decision to basically decide not to vote against and veto that vote. Do you see that happening again?
Well, they're threatening to do that. I mean, already I think it was leaked over the last few days, some sort of draft resolution that's being circulated around. They are absolutely threatening to do that. But again, what I would say is anything that the Biden administration does can be undone. And even with some sort of resolution, remember the U.S. has an enormous amount of leverage against the United Nations. And so if the UN passes some sort of resolution that's not aligned with American policy, there's a lot of leverage that the United States has to deal with that situation. So I know that in Israel right now, and obviously I just returned, Jonathan. I was there with you a few weeks ago. I know there's a lot of concern about this action in the UN, this hurried action in the UN, like they did last time around. But again, remember the U.S. has an enormous amount of leverage to deal with the UN.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Duran, let's talk Iran. Mr. Ezra just noted, of course, a couple of variables here. But one point that we do hear coming out of the Islamic Republic is the RGC chief threatening to strike Israel directly. The commander of the military saying that same rhetoric or that same line within that scope of rhetoric. Are we expected to see a direct Iranian attack towards Israel, or are reports about preparations on Iraqi soil to strike at Israel a viable alternative that the Iranians will be able to somehow expect a diminished response from Israel, even though that in most likelihood would not be regarded as such?
The Iranians might be preparing an attack, as you say, from Iraqi territory in order to reduce the justification for an Israeli counterattack on Iranian soil. However, the Iranians might also be using these kind of preparations as a way of putting pressure on the Americans to put pressure on the Israelis to move things toward a ceasefire. I think that the Iranians at this point are naked before Israel. We saw that in Israel's last attack. Israel destroyed all of the air defenses of the Iranians. They took out the production capabilities of the Iranians for certain ballistic missiles. They took out, apparently now we're reading in the press, a secret nuclear site at Parchin. And so on. And it just shows that if Israel decides to attack Iran, there's nothing Iran can do to prevent it. So the only option they have really is to try to activate the Americans, to instill fear in the Americans and in the international community that any conflict between Israel and Iran is going to result in a much wider conflict in the region. So I would be inclined to put the interpretation of Iran's actions more on the side of pressuring the international system than actually preparing for an attack. But it's not. I wouldn't want to bet the farm on that. The Iranians feel a need to demonstrate to the world that they cannot be attacked in the way that Israel attacked them, and that they have not just rolled over after that kind of humiliation.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. General Kuperwasser, tomorrow will be the International Atomic Energy Agency's Board of Governors meeting, a periodic meeting, of course, that entails a certain weight on Iran in particular, especially after the United Kingdom came out with a draft for a potential resolution to censor Iran over breaching all kind of parameters, not only of the so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action of the 2015 nuclear agreement, so-called, but rather also of its non-proliferation treaty commitments, something that will, of course, bring a certain reaction, as was also noted to the Director General of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, during his recent trip to Tehran. Are we expected to see a certain escalation of proliferation of some sort of enrichment capacity? Some talk about the potential of raising the bar once again to 90% during this lame duck period of the current administration in Washington. Is that something that we should be concerned about?
Well, basically, the Iranians are saying that they are going to do something if such a resolution is going to pass in the meetings of the board. And there are all kinds of things they can do, but we have to be prepared for the worst. And for the worst. And that's, I think, something that we have to bear in mind, that they might run, or at least try to rush towards a bomb, and at least do the step of enriching uranium to 90%. It's one thing they can do. It's very easily. They can have enough material enriched to 90% for an atomic device, a nuclear device, within no time at all. And if they are going to use such a device in order to prove that they have the capability to produce nuclear weapons, this is going to create a totally new situation. And still Biden is in the Oval Office and not Trump is there. And this is a meaning from the point of view of the Iranians. These are the last days that they can do something like that, and hope that nothing will happen to them. They might be wrong, by the way, but they might still, it's their prerogative to be wrong. So this is a possibility that we have to bear in mind. But we have to, at the same time, also understand that the Trump effect is already there. And the Iranians understand that it's a new game, and they have to adapt their policies. This is why the Iranians are trying to convince Hezbollah to accept some sort of a deal, not maybe exactly the deal that we're looking at in Lebanon, but some sort of a deal in order to ease the pressures. They understand that they have like 2 months, exactly, as a matter of fact, 2 months, to create a new situation that would protect them from what might happen if Trump really wants to hit them hard. And they have to use this time. So they're trying to deter the British and everybody else from adopting a resolution. But if we go forward with this resolution, I'm not sure that they are going to do all kinds of dangerous stuff. We saw how problematic the situation of the Iranians is in the way they reacted to our attack in October against them. They threatened and threatened and threatened, but still they haven't done anything. It's a very complicated situation from an Iranian point of view, because they understand that they are exposed to military attacks. They can't stop anything that's going to be directed towards them. They don't have an effective air defense. The Israelis and definitely the Americans can hit them really hard. It's a very difficult situation, but and at the same time, if they don't do anything, they might lose the entire project. So it's really between a rock and a hard place. That's where they are. A very problematic situation. They still believe that they can do something more sophisticated, like some assassinations of high dignitaries. But even on that, we saw that they made it clear that they didn't have a plan to kill President Trump and so on and so forth, in spite of the fact that it seems that they did. It's a very difficult situation for the Iranian regime at this point.
Indeed, being between the rock and the hard place is...
We have to be prepared to any eventuality, anyhow.
Naturally. As you noted, a very problematic situation for them. Thankfully, we're not in between the rock and the hard place, at least not in this context. But Mr. Cohen, I'd like to ask you, since on the 27th of October, when Israel struck a number of sites in Iran, one of those sites was a installation next to the nuclear reactor in Palchin, particularly, where, according to a couple of reports that were published just recently, it entailed also a nuclear weapons testing site that has been active for the past year. In the event that this now provides us clear indication, of course, that the Iranians have been active on a weapons program for its nuclear ambitions, will this trigger a certain reaction from the future administration in Washington to be even more resolute than it initially intended to?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's any doubt with anybody that's credible in Washington that Iran has always been working on a nuclear weapon during the last 4 years. So it won't really surprise anyone. So I'm not sure if the reaction will be different. Again, what I think you're going to see is the U.S. government return to a very close partnership with Israel to restrict Iran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon. But I will say one of the things that came out over the past weekend, and it's really no surprise, but again, we see the really exquisite nature of Israel's understanding of the Iranian systems and weapons program, in that they hit the one facility that seems to be the bottleneck in the process. So it meant that they had to have a very, very good understanding of which facility wasn't duplicated somewhere else, and they knew that that was the exact place to hit. Again, that shows an incredible amount of fidelity in the Israelis' intelligence, and so that's really quite laudable.
Dr. Duran, how many bottlenecks were struck in that specific strike? It's really staggering.
Yeah, I since I don't know how to make ballistic missiles, and I don't know how to build a nuclear weapon, I can't tell you exactly how many bottlenecks. But I will say it was very interesting that the Israelis struck a nuclear site because they
An undeclared
nuclear site. There was in addition, as Ezra pointed out, this is exquisite intelligence, but it's also exquisite signaling to the Iranians, because the Americans, the Biden administration, puts strong pressure on the Israelis not to hit nuclear sites. And in a sense, they abided by the Americans' wishes in that they didn't hit any declared nuclear sites, but they did hit an undeclared one, which the Iranians cannot complain about in public, because then they would have to admit that they're carrying out nuclear research that they claim they're not carrying out. It's like stealing money from a thief. If you steal money from a thief, you can't go to the police to complain about it. So they showed, in doing that, though, they also showed the Iranians that Iran cannot hide behind the American restrictions. It cannot rely on America's pressure on Israel to restrain Israel to the degree that Iran needs. And that's part of what is deterring Iran right now, I think. So it was really quite an amazing operation. The more we learn about it, the more amazing we understand it to be.
Well, we have 3 minutes left for today's edition. I'd like to give each and every one of you 1 minute to give somewhat of a analysis or a prediction for the near future. General Kupelwasser, we'll start with you.
Well, I think these are very important moments in the Middle East, when we shall see whether Israel can take advantage of the Trump effect in order to create a new situation in the Middle East in which the Iranian threat is diminished dramatically or not. And right now, it seems that President Biden and President Trump both want to see some progress in this direction, which is a unique situation, especially in the Lebanese context. We'll see whether it works.
Mr. Cohen?
I think that President Trump certainly wants to come in and create and really return the Middle East to a much more stable situation. He's going to drive ahead with strengthening the Abraham Accords, restoring the Abraham Accords, bringing Saudi Arabia hopefully into the fold. To do that, he does need a more peaceful and stable situation. I think it's going to be hard to do that while the conflict is going on. So he's definitely going to want to bring that to an end. But what's different than the Biden administration is he's not going to bring that to an end by restricting Israel. He's going to bring that to an end by actually empowering Israel to be able to get the job done. And this is the key difference. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to be, an indefinite kind of timeline. They're definitely going to want to get this done quickly, but it's going to be done. That's going to be done in a much more cooperative way.
Dr. Duran?
When I look at the Trump administration coming in, I have no doubt that from the Israeli point of view, the worst day of the incoming Trump administration is going to be better than any average day of the Biden administration, because Trump is going to be much more supportive of Israel and he's going to be much more hostile to Iran. The big question mark I have in my mind, and we just have to watch this closely, is what is Trump's attitude going to be toward military deterrence of Iran, and in particular, in cooperation with Israel? What's the tolerance level of the Trump administration going to be for Israeli military action against Iran? Because Iran is going to try to widen any conflict, by attacking, say, Saudi Arabia, in a way that would force the United States to commit forces to the Middle East. And that's something that Trump is going to, I think, be a little bit hesitant to do. So that's the big question mark I have, but I have no doubt that there's going to be much more cooperation against Iran between the United States and Israel.
With a series of decisions, if I may add, also of Turkey that need to be taken into account. The Russian movements, we're seeing them deploying along the border with Israel on the Golan Heights, of course, establishing all kind of new parameters. We'll have to see how the Russian fingerprints, as well as the Chinese fingerprints, seeking to deepen their involvement in Saudi Arabia and Iran, may also have a certain impact on the incoming administration in Washington.
There's no doubt that we're going to have work to do here at the Deep Dive.
Absolutely. That is an understatement. But with that, I'd like to thank General Kupelwasser, Mr. Cohen, and Dr. Duran for all of your insights. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. This has been Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, wishing you a good day. The Middle East, home to the cradle of civilization, retains a reputation from time immemorial as one of the most complex, conflict-ridden regions of the world. A cluster of nations, religions, powers, and influences, Mid-East intricacies pose conundrums to even the most astute individuals. Bombarded daily, indeed every minute, by a barrage of information, some accurate, yet most of it less so, TV7 Israel invites you to watch and hear some of the most knowledgeable experts, most of whom partook in creating policies shaping this region today. Join us for Jerusalem Studio every Tuesdays and Fridays for content that truly matters.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.